Speaking, you can see the, so to speak, dialectical history of the development of the Geist or spirit here in the rise of all these stages. Actually, you know, even the simplest appearance of something like sense certainty in the structure of the spirit itself implies its separation, and every new stage actually extends the dimension of this separation of the spirit from its own self, as you can see. It's through the establishment of the sensibility, actually, first of all, even though it's not on a conceptual plane yet, okay, the separation of the inner and outer comes into the place, you know. And the very appearance of sensibility itself, that something here turns out to be capable of something there, sets the division between the inner and outer, as you can see. Okay? My hand now touching something which is not my hand. The very sense of touching implies this separation of my hand from this something which it turns out to be necessarily external to it. Okay? So it is this separation. And as a whole, as you can see, it has already been and always been a unity in its own self. But in it is unity separating from itself. Now, when, for instance, perception and understanding comes into the picture, this separation now acquires a new meaning and content. Now, the conscious I, Cartesian I thing, okay, divides itself from the rest of the not I. Okay? I, as a determined, definite something, emerges in history, separate from the rest, and starts to look at the rest. Okay? This implies nothing else than an expansion of the dimensions of this self-separation of the spirit. Okay? In other words, alienation. I'll later on concentrate on the dimensions of alienation here at this stage of consciousness. But for the time being, let's continue with its development. Okay? As I told you, the rise of understanding in Hegelian interpretation roughly corresponds to the stage arrived at by Kantian philosophy, Kantian thinking. So you can easily understand that the rest now, okay, is nothing else than expressed, the later development of the spirit is now expressed by the later thinkers, primarily, of course, by the understanding arrived at the Hegelian philosophy, okay, itself. The Hegelian thinking. Now, the aim here, don't forget, there's a purpose in doing this, conducting this phenomenology. We have started with the Kantian thinking, don't forget, which culminates in nothing else than the radical separation of the world of appearance and world of the things in themselves. Okay? Now, the aim here is to overcome this separation, okay? Simply because as long as that separation remains there, there is no truth value in the real sense of the term for our knowledge. Okay? So we need to overcome this dichotomy, this division of the worlds into two. Okay? And when understanding emerged, therefore, we have arrived at the completion of this stage, which is called by consciousness or development of consciousness. In other words, consciousness now with understanding had developed in its full bloom. Okay? But it doesn't stop there. Okay? It continues its movement. The spirit continues its movement, and consciousness passes to a stage, okay, perhaps an intermediary stage, okay, which is called by Hegel as self-consciousness. Now, this stage is a rather strange stage simply because if you have followed me in my discussion of the Kantian thinking, you'll find out that for Kantian thinking, actually this was one of the points discussed in Zimmel's article as well. In Kantian thinking, understanding or consciousness can never be sure of the actual existence of something outside of itself. This includes you as well, okay? Seen from the point of view of my consciousness, you are all appearances belonging to the internality of my own consciousness, okay? Now, there was a difficulty in Kantian in that regard, simply because when I apply this principle to practical life, okay, the results turn out to be undesirable from the Kantian point of view itself. Okay? So Kantian practical philosophy tries to overcome this difficulty, okay, by bringing the human, defining the other human, the question of the other human, okay, as, or rejecting the question of the other human in the form of the expression of a means for my consciousness. Okay? And I guess I gave the principal statement in that regard. One of the expressions of Kantian moral imperative: never take any other human being as a means for your own ends. Okay? However, as you can see, within the framework of the critique of pure reason, such a result turns out to be almost impossible. Why? Simply because here, in the first critique, we were dealing with knowledge. Okay? But in the second critique, okay, we were outside of the field of knowledge, okay, which was primarily based upon a faith. Okay? Fine. Now, however, here the situation is rather different. Okay? For Hegelian thinking, the rise of self-consciousness acquires a specific importance simply because it brings before us this same question. Okay? How a certain given consciousness, say my consciousness, okay, come to recognize the undeniable existence of your consciousness. Okay? So this stage starts with a confrontation of one originary consciousness with another consciousness. Okay? Actually, this happens all the time, at least since the human beings began to crowd the surface of the world, you know? Okay? From that time on, we come across with others, we communicate with others, we cooperate with others, we fight with others, so on and so forth. Okay? We interact with the others anyway. We come across with others. But this does not necessarily mean that it would yield the development of a new stage all the time in the larger history of the development of the spirit. Okay? There is a certain condition for it. Okay? Now, so let's take our illustrations of consciousness in a rather smaller fashion here, just to be able to represent their encounter. Okay? Now, what's at stake? The encounter of at least, of course, two consciousnesses. Okay? Now, what determines one consciousness as consciousness in relation with another consciousness? In other words, how can I know that you have a consciousness? Okay, okay, you are my appearances, but how can I know within the Kantian framework of Kantian thinking that what I tend to think that your consciousness is nothing else than a concept in my own consciousness, an appearance in my own consciousness. Now, there's an interesting criteria here, bringing into question the idea of force, you know. So just before entering into this discussion, Hegel will bring this problem of force into history. Okay? And he would say that this encounter, the quality of the other's consciousness shows itself in that force of resistance. Okay? What's at stake here? Actually, this is one of the basic problems of the modern theory of knowledge. The relationship of knowledge is not a neutral relationship. Okay? It's a relationship of power. At the moment, when I begin to speak of the possibility of knowing something, you know, I establish a relationship whose terms are not posited in relation to each other on an equal footing. Say, for instance, any relationship of knowledge necessarily involves, I said, a knower and unknown. They are not equal. One is capable of knowing, you know. The other is only capable of to be known. In modern terminology, as you are familiar, okay, we call them a subject of knowledge and object of knowledge. And the power of acting here in this strange relationship is only part of the subject. Okay? We will see this term subject has many interesting connotations, but for the time being it will suffice for us to understand that this term contains the power of knowing. And worse still, if Kant was right, it was not a simple knowing of things, but it was as well the shaping or making of things. Okay? The objects of knowledge within the framework of Kantian thinking are nothing else than the makings of the operations of the categories within understanding. Don't forget. Okay? So the object has already been made by the subject within this perspective. Okay? So this means that the object does not have an independent status than the subject. Okay? It is dependent upon the subject. Okay? While the subject is not dependent upon the object simply because the subject can take itself anything else as object. But object can only stand in relation to that subject. Okay? I, as a knowing person, am interested in knowing this, or perhaps not this, but this time that. Okay? And it is up to me to decide, to choose, etc. Okay? So, however, here, the relationship of force expresses primarily itself in the resistance of the confronted consciousness, the other consciousness, to be reduced by the earlier consciousness to the status of it is one of objects. Okay? In other words, it means that when, as original consciousness, I confront with the things in the world, all these things in the world, okay, whether phenomenal or appearances or does not make much difference here, okay, confront the things of the world as if they are objects of my knowledge. Okay? Now, however, here, the other consciousness turns out to be the only capable thing, perhaps, to resist my efforts to reduce it to one of my objects. Okay? In other words, resists my efforts of shaping it, forming it. Okay? For instance, a very good example could be a very easy example to understand, could be the relationship between two individual human beings which are forced, if you like, or out of the necessities of life, okay, forced to share the same house, you know, all having, these two persons I am talking about, having different habits, different lifestyles, different tastes with regard to the matters of life, etc., etc., but finding themselves necessarily share the same space, same limited space, which means that they are enforced to keep an ongoing relationship. Okay? Now, within that, you'll find out that each one of these persons will try to shape the other in accord with their own preferences. Okay? Yani, come on, man, I don't like you putting your toothpaste on this platform, okay? Or I do not like your keeping to wash dishes or postponing it for another day, okay? I like a tidy and clean house, for instance, while you may not prefer so much to live in a so much tidy and clean house, okay? Persons are different. Now they are confronting each other, and one pressing its own desires or wishes or understanding of the world, if you like, onto the other. Okay? Now the other, if the other yields, for instance, we will see what will happen in such a case. There are, of course, several possibilities of outcome here. Okay? If one yields to the other, you can say that one loses one's own specific personality under the pressure of the other, right? The powerful figure, okay? Therefore, for instance, in a relationship of classical Turkish kind, okay, traditional, let me say, okay, man and wife. Now, as you know, this is usually an unequal sort of relationship where wife is expected to act in according to the desires and wishes of the man, husband, okay? So the usual social expectation is that women should abide by the demands of the man, or if you like, should act in accordance with the dictates of the man. Okay, if woman completely acts this way and gives herself away to the desires of, say, her husband, okay, we can say that there is a loss of consciousness on the part of the woman here. Okay? It yields. It turns out to be an object to be manipulated, to be shaped in accord with the desires of the other consciousness. Okay? But if the woman resists, that's what I am talking about, if the woman resists, pushes forward her own personality, specific personality, what you would expect is a whose tensions may differ from couple to couple, is a rise of tension, you know, a struggle of characters, if you like, or a struggle of personalities. Bana karakter yapma falan. Don't try to push your character on me, etc. Okay? So there ensues a struggle of two consciousness. This is exactly the point, okay? The possibility of the confrontation of two consciousness in contradistinction and against each other only emerges when the other consciousness, the second consciousness, turns out to be capable of displaying a resistance against the original consciousness efforts to reduce it, the second consciousness, to one of its objects. In other words, the other consciousness says that, no, I am not one of your objects. No, you are not free to shape me as you like. I am another. Okay? This force of resistance brings us to the question of the confrontation of two consciousnesses. And as long and as much as this resistance is there, okay, actually, what's at stake is a fight, a war. The struggle of two consciousnesses to overcome the resistance of other consciousness. Okay? Now, Hegel calls this or interprets this situation as a life and death war. Okay? Consciousnesses engage against each other so severely that at least at the beginning, they want to annihilate the other. You know, the situation is something like this. Yeah, this house was mine, okay? I was free to shape this house according to my own tastes. Now somebody else comes along and tells me that I am doing wrong, okay? Now I must share that house, which was mine once, okay, with somebody else, having different preferences, different tastes, different understandings, and creating disturbance in my world, okay? And I do not like it standing over there inside my world. I hate it, okay? Therefore, I engage a very serious struggle against it as to reduce the specific effects of its existence in my world. Okay? And if I succeed in this, okay, if I kill the other, if I throw the other out of my house, what happens is the resumption of my original earlier happiness in my own solitude. But don't forget, this original happiness was in solitude, and within the framework of the immanence of my own consciousness, I was thinking that I am the sole thinking itself. Okay? The whole world, the totality of all, was dependent upon me. Okay? I was at the center as the king, center of power actually, deciding what will appear in this world and what will not appear and in what shape. Okay? Now, however, something did appear in this world which rejects to abide my expectations, or if you like, using Kantian terminology, rejects to abide by the regulations of or rules of my own understanding. Okay? Now, of course, I don't like it. Okay? It's kind of parasite over there. Okay? A noise creating disturbance in my well-organized world. Okay? Challenging my kingdom, my central point, by being the central point of this world. I don't like it. And I try to kill it. I try to cancel its existence out from my own existence. Okay? If I succeed in this, though, however, the result is nothing else than a return back to my originary solitude, loneliness. Okay? In such a case, there can't be any sociability, if you like. Okay? No sociability, but loneliness. There's another options, however, other options, that the war can continue to go on. In such a situation, Hegel describes this as a relationship of, from the situation of war, transformation of war or fight into a relationship of domination. Domination now is an interesting term. It means that out of this war, one of the consciousnesses turns out to be capable of establishing its own superiority, but up to a certain limit. Not totally, okay? Up to a certain limit, okay? There was a struggle, and struggle acquires gradually a sort of institutionalization. Institutionalization here in this context means that two of the parties engaged in this relationship, after a certain point, come to recognize the existence of certain regularities in their relationship. Okay? Not necessarily, it's not necessary that they both like these regularities, but come to recognize, for instance, wife comes to recognize that socially, even though she may personally feel herself equal to her husband, okay, she comes to recognize that socially men are recognized and accepted as superior in relation to the women. Therefore, she should act according to this larger social expectations, for instance. Okay? Okay, this is, while her keeping a certain degree of, I'm going to talk about degree here, degree of consciousness peculiar to her own, okay, within the frame of that particular relationship, she yields. And these yielding points, these giving ups, establish themselves as the repeated events, which means that once this has happened, twice this has happened, thrice this has happened, for the fourth time you are going to expect that this will happen as well. Okay? This is nothing else than what we call institutionalization in that regard. So what's at stake here is the institutionalization of an unequal relationship between two self-consciousnesses. Okay? Actually, Hegel would call this the dialectic of the master and servants. Okay? This is one of the most actually critical points in Hegelian phenomenology, simply because this point refers to the possibility of consciousness transferring itself to self-consciousness. Now, the difference is this, okay? Consciousness as such does not know that it is a peculiar, specific something, okay? Why? Simply because for it, as long as it remains within its own immanence, for it, there is nothing to confront with, okay? It is alone. It is alone means it cannot enter into any kind of relationship with anything other which is not itself already. And this means that it does not have any possibility of knowing what it is specifically. Okay? Why? Simply because without relationship, that originary Kantian form of consciousness does not have any opportunity to acquire any determination. In other words, if I do not relate myself with others, I would not know, I wouldn't know where I'd like to put my toothpaste, okay? And only with these encounters I come to know something specific about myself and begin to tell that I do not like these and I like these, etc., okay? But without having been related with anything else than myself, I will not be in such a position, okay? This means, in Hegelian terminology, I will not acquire any historical determination and specificity, okay? I would remain as something forever abstract, okay? So this is why it's so much important that Hegel finally finds something which is genuinely capable of resisting to be reduced to an object. Okay? And this is critical. And only with the existence of this other, the consciousness would have the opportunity to enter into any genuine relationship with its externality and gradually come to recognize itself as something finite and definite and determined within the structures of that relationship, which means within history. Okay? That's the crucial point. Otherwise, you would hang on throughout all these transformations of the spirit without such an encounter. You would hang along without knowing what you specifically at a certain moment of history are. Okay? Only through this encounter, and there's a very specific character of this encounter where you cannot say that what confronts you is yet another object. Okay? Simply because you have already divided the world, you have withdrawn from the world as an abstract I, Cartesian I, or empty consciousness, even though having it decorated with categories still all belonging to you, and there is no point of outside reference, okay? You are, specifically speaking, is nothing, or at the same time, everything, okay? To be something, in other words, okay, not everything, not nothing, but to be something, such an encounter has been necessitated. And it is this encounter, actually, which will set for us, sociologists, for instance, the very possibility of thinking about the social, okay? How human beings relate with each other. Now we are going to start to appreciate, okay, how human beings get in touch or involved in relation with each other and what they are doing. Okay, one of the first analysis. Out of this, Marx will develop his notions of class struggle, etc., as you can see. Okay, it is this core. Now, as you can see, this has already been expressed in Hegel in social terms. Okay, now only what's at stake, not only two abstract consciousness confronting each other, but the moment of realization for each consciousness that there is a real externality confronting them is actually the moment of the development of self-consciousness. Now, self here means that I know myself separated from this other. Okay? Therefore, having specific peculiarities of my own. Okay? I know that I like these activities and I do not like these activities, and the only possible knowledge of this is nothing else than confronting the other. Okay? It is this confrontation. Of course, not happy, and as you can see, what it produces when it tends to be institutionalized is a relationship of domination. And it expresses in the social life, as you can see, no longer between two abstract individuals, but historically specific categories of an unequal relationship. Okay? The master and the slave. Okay? The one who got the upper hand on the one hand, and the other one who yielded to the powerful party. Okay? Now, development does not stop there, but let's a little bit concentrate on the situation of these two respective consciousnesses, the consciousness of the master and the servant. Now, Hegel will tell us that when the relationship of domination establishes itself, okay, it grows increasingly unsatisfying for both of the parties. Okay? Well, for instance, one of the results is that, okay, the division or this establishment of the unequal relationship between two consciousnesses is this. Okay? The consciousness of the master, finds the opportunity to develop its consciousness. In other words, practically speaking, in social life, it develops culture, okay, poetry, arts, etc., literature, philosophy, sciences. Okay, you can imagine it develops culture, but in the meantime, okay, weakens, loses its relationships with life, actual life. Okay, why? Simply because now the other consciousness, reduced to the status of a slave, if not object, okay, works for it. Okay, it works for it. Therefore, while the consciousness of the slave begins to fade away, weakening, okay, continuously weakening, this is one of the difficulties in Marxist theory of class consciousness, okay, the consciousness of the working class, etc., simply because in this relationship, the consciousness of working class begins to weaken. Actually, this problem, as you may remember, expresses itself within the Marxist discussions in the form of the role of the intellectuals and political party with regard to the mass of the workers. Okay? Mass of the workers continuously and insistently being unable to understand the realities, material realities of their life. Okay? And therefore being prey to the hegemonic ideology of the bourgeoisie. Okay? So that intellectuals organized in a political party trying to get in touch with the working class itself comes into the picture. Okay? So while consciousness turns out to be weakening on the part of the servant, however, the servant's ties with life develops. And besides, there is another problem here. All this struggle, which originally started with the simple confrontation with another something resisting to be my object, okay, actually is for mutual recognition, for recognition. Now I am the powerful party in this relationship, and now I want the recognition of the weaker party. Recognition for what? I am the good one, I am the beautiful one, I am the well-educated one, etc., etc. I am the powerful one, etc. Okay? I am the real one, while it is the fake one, etc. Okay? In other words, saying that my ideology is much better than your ideology, and let's confess it. Okay? Tell it to me that my ideology, my conception of the world, my categories of understanding are much better than yours. You know, see, don't you see that? I am the victorious party in this struggle. But the problem is that the recognition demanded by the master from the servant cannot be met, cannot be satisfied. Why? Simply because on the part of the servant, the consciousness which originally will produce that recognition has been already weakened. And the servant turned out to be a yes man for the master. Okay? Yani my wife, rather than displaying any resistance in accord with my desires, my wishes, confirms whatever I ask from her. Okay? Always says yes, you know the best. Okay? Now, when we arrive such a situation within the structure of domination, you can easily understand that such a yes saying on the part of the servant can no longer be satisfactory for the demand of the master to get recognition from the other. Okay? So Hegel would call this understanding, that situation, as unhappy consciousness on the part of the master. In other words, master's consciousness, after the establishment of the relationship of domination and after the reduction of the other to a yes-saying servant, okay, cannot satisfy himself by the recognition of that yes-saying servant any longer. Okay? Therefore, after the arrival of this stage, it begins to elevate the status of the servant, okay, as to make the servant equal to himself or itself. Let's speak devoid of gender here. Itself, by decorating the servant with the rights. Okay? Now, the situation is this. Okay? Now, first of all, both of the consciousnesses were unknown to each other, each consciousness thinking it's the center of the world. Now they confronted each other. One reduced the other to the status of the servant, elevating itself to the position of the master and establishing and institutionalizing an unequal relationship. But however, since this relationship in the final analysis is a relationship for the satisfaction of the demand of recognition for both of the parties, okay? Now, however, the position is that the recognition of the reduced party can no longer satisfy the demand for recognition of the superior party, okay? So, to be able to arrive, to be able to save myself from this unhappy condition, then I began, as master, I began to decorate the servant with rights as to elevate its position to a position which is more or less equal to mine. So only equals recognition that therefore can satisfy that demand for recognition. Okay? Only equals independent minds can satisfy why their recognition the demand of others. Okay? So therefore, under the modern state, if you like, okay, this is why people had been decorated by rights. Okay. Marx would interview here, and would tell you that no, this is not because of the unhappy situation of the consciousness of the master. Okay? The expansion of the rights is due to, remember, due to the struggle of the working class. Rights cannot be given, he would say, but can only be taken. Okay? Okay, but whatever our preferences, Hegel's story tells us that it is the master's consciousness finally finding out a way to satisfy its own demand for recognition, decorates the servant as to elevate him or her to a status, the status of someone who is more or less equal to him. Okay? Now, hence you can understand the expansion of the equal rights for everyone, etc., in modern societies. Now, However, as you can see, this is the first appearance of any genuine possibility of social relationship in history. Now, from that stage on, up until now, we were talking in our history of the spirit, we were talking about some certain material entities, you know, the minerals, for instance, the inanimate nature, living beings, plants, animals, human beings, etc. Now there comes something completely new in the history of the spirit this time. What's this? You can guess. Society. Okay. When this elevation of the status of the servant to someone more or less equal, we arrive at this stage of reason. This means that self-consciousness, consciousness, by turning itself into self-consciousness, and by learning to be with, in a peaceful relationship, to be with another self-consciousness in a society, okay, according to Hegel, heralds, manifests another stage in the development of the spirit. Now, this time, we are not talking about understanding, Verstehen, but appearance of reason, Vernunft, for the first time in the history of society. And reason here implies that at least one of the crucial alienations of the consciousness or spirit has been overcome. What was this? The separation of the self-consciousness in contradistinction to other self-consciousness. Okay? Now it has been sublated in the unity of the society, which is nothing else than the expression of reason, which itself another new stage in the development of the Geist. Okay? Now, this is quite a difficult relationship because it requires the institutionalization of that mutual recognition involving in these social relationships. Now, you should not confuse here your preconceived idea of society with the Hegelian conception of society discussed there. Okay? First of all, this is not a society composed of individuals. Yes, in its formation, we are talking about the formation of self-consciousness, which can easily be resembled to the individuals in our otherwise conceptualized society as well. But you should not think that the very individuality of these individuals, the self part of the consciousness, if you like, okay, pertains to the individuals which were given prior to any possible relationship. No, this is not the case. Okay? As you have seen, our original consciousness does not know anything outside of its own self. And it only comes to appreciate the fact that it is not the sole thing existing in the world with such a confrontation with another consciousness, which means that their determination does not owe to their own existence, but their determination depends upon their entering into a mutual relationship. Okay? So even the possibility of emergence of an individual here, okay, requires an involvement into such kind of a social relationship. Okay? This means that within the Hegelian framework, individual does not stand there by itself. Okay? An individual can only be possible within the social relations of society. Okay? Nowhere else. Fine. So therefore, the very individuality, or in this terminology, the very self part of the consciousness here owes it is coming into the picture to this relationship. It is not prior to the relationship, in other words, but it is produced within the structure of relationship. Okay? So never think that your individuality belongs to you. Okay? It is produced through the social, so to speak. Okay? Or at least this is how Hegel tends to understand. Therefore, society now cannot be understood as an agglomeration, a coming together of those already existing individuals together and doing something together, okay? No, okay? A society emerges itself as an entity, okay? Entity whose existence producing the individuality of its own members, so to speak. Okay, let's cut it here for today.